How are we doing,
Yeah.
everybody? Welcome back to Crime Theory with myself, Ron Swanson, and of course, John Wedger. We have been deep diving into some incredible theories over the last few weeks, and this is episode 4. And thank you very much for joining us. We're going to be delving deep into 2 cases this evening once again. It's the case of the Wests, Fred and Rosemary West, and Sydney Cooke. And, you know, we've got none other than John Wedger diving into this with us. And I just want to say thank you once again for being here, John. And how are you this evening?
Yeah, it's an absolute pleasure, and it's a topic that's not only is it interesting, it's very close to my heart, and because I've dealt on the child stuff for many years, and in one of the cases, children, so I have got that passion, and there's always, whenever you look into these cases, nothing is ever straightforward, especially when you deal with what is termed as serial killers. But so on that front, I'm looking forward to it tonight, to sharing some info, some facts, and some thesis.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm good. I'm good. I'm working hard, keeping my head down. But like someone said to me, be like a submarine. Go under for a little while, but keep working, and every now and then poke your head up, and then back under again. And that was sound advice from
Yeah.
a very wise person.
That's a
So
great
that's what I've been doing.
analogy. I'm discovering your analogies are something that I'm very fond of week by week, John. I have to be honest. So thank you for that. Well, listen, we're just going to dive straight in with this because I'm a huge fan of the way that John gets his information across to us. So I know you guys will be itching for this. So, John, take it away and let us start off with the Wests.
Yeah. Now, so what we're looking at is serial killer. So, what is a serial killer? Now under UK law, it's actually there is a legal definition of a serial killer, and it's someone or someone's, and there's got to be more than 3 murders of people in a period that spans greater than a month. Okay, and within the serial killer description, you can break that down into 4 categories. So they've actually defined serial killers in 4 different categories. One is a visionary, so someone who's got some sort of plan for the future, as it were. One is mission orientated, so that, I suppose you get that with leaders and things like that, and maybe even cult leaders. They've got a plan. Hedonistic, which clearly comes under the West, and power and control orientated. And some of these merge together. So I would have thought
Of course.
hedonistic and power and control do tend to sort of come together. And if you've got
Yeah.
someone who's got a worship of the occult or got some sort of satanic drive to it, then the last 3 all sort of blend in with each other. So the West, I mean, Fred and Rose West. So they came to notice in the early 1990s, and Fred and Rose were arrested in 1992.
Gloucester police have called another press conference in the morning. It's thought that could signal yet another body has been found at number 25 Cromwell Street. The 7th has already been discovered, and police say the search will go on. They're planning to dig in a field near the Hertfordshire border, at a caravan site, and at another house in Gloucester. They believe the number of bodies could go well into double figures.
We've looked in 4 of the areas that it told us to look in, and we found 4 bodies. It now indicates some more areas that we should search, and we will be doing that.
Its surface is marked with chalk, a map for discovering the secrets that might lie beneath this cellar floor. Filmed yesterday, shortly before police began their excavation work, to find out if this is the final resting place of a 15-year-old girl. In 1968, Mary Bastome worked in the cafe above. She was wearing a blue coat when she disappeared. It was the discovery of what appears to be a piece of blue material in a void under the floor that has led detectives to begin their search in a room that was once worked on by the serial killer Fred West. The The video was filmed by the ITV documentary team that made that discovery. The police have since found 6 hidden holes under the cellar, which they've now spent a second day excavating.
So we're looking at the West, and they were arrested for murder. And the officers initially they weren't expecting it to end up as a serial killing case. They were the biggest serial killers we've had in this country, and maybe ranked highly on a global level. And they resided in a Victorian terraced house at 25 Cromwell Street in Gloucester, in the city of Gloucester in the West Country. Okay, so a married couple, and what you've got to look at with these people is the parallels. There's so many parallels regarding these murderers, and especially when you get the hedonistic ones, the perverted ones,
Of course.
and you'll find that these people, they're not they don't just appear on the scene. They're made. They come from abusive childhood backgrounds. I mean, Fred West comes from a very disturbing, strange background.
Yeah.
Although he claims that his parents had an incestuous relationship with the children.
Okay.
His brother denies it. However, I'm more inclined to go with Fred on this one.
Okay.
And he said that it was sex with his mother was just commonplace, and the guy clearly was sexually driven. He was a monumental pervert, this fella.
He was a labour worker, wasn't he? He was a builder, Fred West.
Yeah, he was. His family come from like farm labouring and domestic servitude, and he was brought up on a farm. And back in them days, I mean, we see it now with a lot of these European people that come here, migrate from agricultural countries. The children can work, and they're used to working, and it was very much the case. But it was still the case as I was growing up. It was definitely the case with the generation sort of before myself. So he was brought up sort of as really uneducated labour. Well, there will be dysfunctionality. I mean, they will function,
of course,
on in respect to getting a job and getting a house and things like that. So they function on that sort of social level, but on an emotional level, these are very, very broken people.
Of course, it's like they play the part.
And if a young lad is having sex with his mum, then he's going to grow up with a very, very twisted outlook on life, relationships, women, and everything else. And he was coming to notice quite early on, Fred. He was getting into trouble, and something really bizarre, which needs looking into. He was forever having road traffic accidents in which people were dying. So it could be suggested that this guy, from the age of 17 onwards, was actually getting his kick by killing people, by running them over.
Yeah, thinking that he's found a little loophole for himself there.
Yeah, and he sort of come to notice for the death of a young boy in Glasgow. And the other thing is, he become quite itinerant. He started sort of mooching about the country, but he also started hanging around with young girls. He had a bit of an appetite for women. He was classed as a coward, although he was a woman beater as well. He's very controlling towards women, which you tend to see anyway, that people that commit domestic violence, these are broken people, and they tend to be very childish in their outlook and very cruel.
Well, just as well, I don't know if we mentioned this. Fred West was born in the 40s, 1941, and his crimes spanned 1967 to 87. It was a long career he had. But just to so people understand, it existed, and he existed within this golden era of serial killing, as I refer to it, which is like the start of the 60s to the end of the 80s. There's just no CCTV. There's no technology, wasn't where it was even in the 90s, and there was just the era of snatching a kid outside his house is kind of over when you think about how much CCTV is in place now, which it wasn't back then when we seen those kinds of abductions and killings. And I just wanted to let people, so that they understand the era in which we're talking about here. Growing up in the 40s and starting off your killing spree in the late 60s.
But what we've also got to understand is we've got to understand what the UK was like. Having left the police and then started engaging in my podcast, and I would interview many victims and survivors of institutional and systemic child abuse, people that have come from the care system. There was a lot of kids being put into the care system post-war, and there was a lot of organised abuse, and abuse changes according to the decade, and that's not by chance either. And there's a reason by it. And war, funny enough, affects the sort of child abuse that goes on. And what we found is during the 1950s, there was a lot of sexual abuse on children in care homes by women. And the reason for that was quite straightforward and logical. And they were spinsters. These were war widows, and these were women who had lost, their sons and their husbands to war. And you've got to understand, the UK. There's a big social study on this. It's fantastic. It really is interesting, and it all twines in with the building of council houses. It ties in with the licensing laws, the Vagrancy Act, and it's all to do with trauma and war.
Okay.
The UK had 3 major conflicts, all in a very, very small period of time. They had the Napoleonic conflicts, which then morphed into the First World War. And after the Napoleonic battles, we found a lot of men were just getting drunk and laying on the street and refusing to work because they were so traumatized. And these were farm labourers, these were working men that brought in under conscription. And once they'd done their battling for the UK, they were just dumped. The military just dumped them.
Yeah. Okay.
And they had to bring in the Vagrancy Act. The Vagrancy Act had to be brought in because they made it illegal to be homeless because there were too many homeless people and they didn't care, and the police couldn't control them because they didn't give a flying shit, right? Then we had the First World War, and the UK were hugely instrumental in that, and we lost a lot of people, a huge amount of people. And again, these weren't professional soldiers. These were a conscript army. They were poorly trained. They were set out into appalling man-to-man, hand-to-hand, bayonet to bayonet fighting, and they're coming back from there. So these are people that
heavily
have come from
traumatized
upbringing because parents have been in the Napoleonic conflict. They're then very strict system, and of course it goes on into the Second World War only a couple of decades later. So come the 50s and the 60s, the UK is a very screwed up, angry place, and they had to bring in council homes or kids homes because there was a lot of fatherless kids, council houses to keep people quiet. They cheap alcohol, working men clubs to placate people, and you saw the abolition of conscription because men were refusing to fight. So the UK on a whole was a very screwed up place with a lot of very, very traumatized and damaged individuals. And sort of Fred West is a product of this era growing up. And it was a very disciplined time to be alive. So, there is information that Fred West, from his very tender early years, like adolescent years, was involved in incest with his mother. And also there's allegations of bestiality.
Yeah.
He then suffers 2 separate incidents of major head trauma, which they said changed him. And there's a lot of studies being done about how cranial and cerebral trauma can actually change someone's personality. And they said that this was clear with Fred. And he starts linking him with women. He linked in with a woman called Rena, who was pregnant. He knew her before. This is something really, really, really odd one, right? Because, and something that really needs looking at here.
Okay.
So Fred was seeing this girl. She was from Coatbridge, right? Sort of just outside of Glasgow, that area. It's in Scotland anyway, but it's in the lowlands of Scotland, not the Highlands. And Coatbridge in 1957 came to the media attention for a pedophile ring that was operating there. And years later, a book was written about a girl who went missing called Moira Anderson. And Moira's body was never found, but a guy on his deathbed admitted to her murder, and his name was Alexander Cartzone, right? Cartzone or something.
Okay.
Gartzone, anyway. But he was a local bus driver, and he would pick girls up and kids up, drop them off, and all that. Anyway, this little girl Moira was last seen getting on his bus, and never seen again. And it was on his deathbed. He confessed to it, and his daughter's gone on to write a book. And what she goes on about is the paedophile ring that was operating in that at that time in Hopebridge, and it was to do with dirty videos, children being passed around, and there were allegations that there were police officers. And again, we're seeing a pattern. We will constantly see the same pattern as we go through tonight's episode, and we may see it with future stuff. I mean, it was definitely the case with the stuff I was dealing with. People of prominence in society involved in this clandestine, covert, secret society of paedophilia. And that seems to be the case with Moira Anderson. Now, Fred moved to that area in 1960, but he was a visitor up there anyway, because he was involved with this girl, Rena, who he later met out with later
That's
on.
interesting.
And there has been some suggestion that there's been a lot of children go missing around Fred West, wherever he's been. And we will see this with Sidney Cooke when we move on to him a bit later.
Of course,
so wherever Fred goes in his itinerant life, doing this unskilled labour work, you find dysfunctional children being drawn to him, people that have got sort of issues and everything else. He tends to be this sort of whatever it might be, this fathery figure that they come to, but really what's happening is that they're sealing their fate by accepting his offer for housing and everything else. So he ends up with this woman called Rena, and they have two daughters. Well, she's already pregnant, and she gives birth to a mixed race girl called Charmaine. And then they end up in Glasgow, but Fred gets beaten up quite a few times, and there's allegations that he's a pervert and a pedo. So he moves. So all of a sudden, this label is coming with him, and he ends up coming down, ending up in the Gloucestershire area, and this is where he meets up with Rose West. Rose West is a little bit younger than him. She was born in 1953, but she comes from a similar background, an incestuous, violent, dysfunctional background. Her father was a schizophrenic, a pedophile.
Damn.
And she would regularly be seen when she was like 13, 14 years old, walking around naked, cavorting in front of her father. And she comes from a big family, and she seemed to avoid a lot of the beatings, because the kids would get beaten for no reason, because the rumours are that there was a sexual relationship, a incestuous, perverted relationship between her and her father.
Yeah, damn.
And she's a highly sexualized woman. Anyway, these two meet, Fred and
just
Rose.
before we get on to how they meet, John, just to sort of reiterate what you went over there, you've pointed out that there's been road accidents around Fred West that have happened. There's this ring that took place, and then he's suddenly upped and left the area in which it was. This is all, he's 19 at this point. When he goes down and heads back down south. I mean, he's not. It's a young man we're talking about. Just to put in perspective the mindset of this individual. This is somebody who's clearly learning a craft and learning a trade. From if we believe that he's been running people over, and we believe he was part of this abuse ring, clearly you could put forward the argument that he was refining and learning his craft before he moved on to execute his main plan.
Well, of course, and what we find with a lot of these sex killers and these killers is that they've got these perverted mindset, which is already heavily entrenched from childhood trauma. So their intention has been there for a very, very long time. It's not something that has just cropped up. It's been there since childhood. So they've had this perverted, sadistic intention from a very early age. And it's only later when they learn the life skills and their bodies get stronger that they start enacting these things.
Of
But
course.
the telltale signs are already there. And this is why it's important for things like social services, schools, and any other safeguarding industry to be trained in these disciplines and highlight them and act on them. Which having worked in that area myself, I would say that they're pretty proficient at it. Mistakes are made, and things do get through the net. But on the whole,
Of course.
they protect more kids than they than they lose, as it were. But this guy's Devin, and I would probably say that he's beyond help and redemption by this point. And of course, kids are dying around him, and this is through road traffic accidents.
Okay.
And the inference here is that he's getting his lust now from just running them over and killing them. And back then, they didn't really take these things seriously,
Well, I was going to say, is he targeting children to run over because it's kids run out in front of cars all the time? Is it one of these things that just frames for the era that he was doing it in that fits into an MO that works for him? I mean, obviously it does, because if you're hitting kids, it's safer for you as the killer, because you're not going to have to deal with such a mass hitting your vehicle, and you would expect more kids to run out in front of traffic than adults, right? I mean, that's got to be.
But but also, even if you want to kill an adult, I mean, back then, if you killed someone, it's murder. If you didn't mean to do it, it's manslaughter. Either way, you're looking at double figures. But you run someone over, you might get a couple of years. And also, we've got to look at cars. Cars now are designed to crumple and take impact. Back then, they were solid lumps of iron.
Yeah.
And you hit someone, you're going to do a lot more damage back then than you are now. And brakes are nowhere near as good as they are now. Back then, you were lucky if a car stopped. So you could get away with it. And the other thing is, Fred and Rose, they started coming to notice for molesting lodgers in their house. And, they ended up going to court, the pair of them, for sexual assaults on young girls, but we're just getting fines because, again, the courts never took these things seriously.
Can you touch on that a little bit? To what extent, and was there an MO for how they went about doing that to their lodgers?
Yeah, what they were doing was they were taking lodgers in, because again there was a lot of students in the town. It's a university town. There was a lot of students there, and they were setting themselves up as a place that would take in itinerant people, farm workers, students, foreign students, things like that. And everything would seem fine, but then, Fred would start molesting them. They were drugging them. They were tying them up, and it, Rose started showing the sadistic streak that she had. She was bisexual, and she took a great deal of pleasure in sexually torturing and hurting women. But this starts getting very, very dark and very, very sinister, and it goes beyond the repulsion of murder very, very quickly.
It does.
Fred said to me one day, "Come and have a look at what I've done for the children." So, okay. He took me into the cellar, which was very dark, very dank. He'd painted bits on the walls. He'd put a little bed in there. He'd put little boxes of toys in there. But I'm claustrophobic, so I immediately said to him, "This is very nice, but I need to get out of here." And I was in there probably 5 minutes tops, just looking at it, and praised him up for what he'd done for the children. I just made the decision that I didn't really want to be there with those circumstances. I found an alternative place to live, but something made me not tell them that I was moving out until the day I moved out, which was the day that I would normally pay the rent. And I just sort of said to them, "I'm moving out." They went, "Oh, when?" I went, "Now," because I'd already removed all but one bag full of stuff anyway. And I just walked away. They kind of said, "Are you sure you really want to move out yet?" But what I think about is that Heather was innocent, and I left, and that left Shirley there, and she never got out of it. They killed her, and the baby. Even to this day, it still hurts that I left her there with that baby, and they never got out of there, which does make me realise that I was the next victim.
I mean, between 1971 to 1987, 10 people they got convicted of murdering. Some of them were their own children. Right now, there is estimates that it's many more.
Yeah.
And Rose had a huge sexual appetite, and Fred got her out prostituting. She used to favour black men. At the time, Gloucester had a lot of Caribbean migrants workers there, and they would set themselves up as like a social club for the Caribbean community. And funny enough, I was talking to a guy 2 weeks ago, a Jamaican guy who used to actually go to their parties. He used to go to the West parties. He was even interviewed by the police.
I bet he's got a few things to say.
I had a long chat with him. Yeah, it was a very chance meeting, and he would go on about how she loved. He said his missus loved the black guys, and Fred used to enjoy watching it. They also used to enjoy having sex with their own children, and they would break the young girls in at very early age.
And this was all at these parties that were being thrown by the West.
Yeah, the West were raping their own daughters from the age of 8 upwards.
Wow.
And Rose would sadistically tie the girls down while Fred raped them, and she would sit and gleefully watch. But then people went missing. So the first one to go missing officially was Fred's ex-wife Rena. She went missing, and it's alleged that Rose killed her out of jealousy.
Oh, Jesus.
Fred then goes to prison, right, for an assault.
Of course, yeah.
While he's serving a short sentence, the daughter that Fred's got with Rena, Charmaine, is living with them. And so Rose murders her and puts her body in the coal cellar. And then when Fred comes out a few months later, the body's there and stinking the whole place out. And Fred has to try and remedy that situation. They went on to kill a large percentage of their kids. There was 11 kids they had in all. Some of the kids were sired by some of the punters that Rose was having. But Fred struck up close relationships with local police. There was rumours that he was a police informant, and he was giving information on drug dealing amongst his student tenants.
There was rumours that West was an informant.
Yeah.
This is a clever move,
guys. Because Fred West then strikes up a working relationship with the police, and he set up a bar on the top floor of his building, his Victorian house, and he had a bar there, and there was also a room where his missus would go and get shagged, so she had her own little brothel running. They were also pimping out their 13-year-old daughter at the same time. And one of the West children was saying that at the bar, which was called the Black Magic Bar, and we need to spend a bit of time on that naming,
of course,
for a bit, because there is a huge relevance in that.
Of course, yeah.
So,
no problem. Take us through it.
And the kids were saying that at the Black Magic Bar there would be punters there that were in suits, and some of them were local police officers, and that these police officers were also having sex with Rose. So they've now gone beyond the point of no return in respect to ever sort of looking into anything wrongdoing that Fred and Rose, because they're getting very pally now. They're drinking for free up in the bar, and they're shagging his missus, right, in the Black Magic Bar.
Yeah.
Now, there's been quite a few books written about this pair, and there's one, and it goes on about the first police officer to really look into them. It was a woman on the child protection team, and she was constantly badgering her senior officer, saying, "We got to look at these people. I think they're linked to the missing women in the area." and it was dismissed, and she applied many times to get a warrant to search the place, right, for missing people or parts of missing people. Now, in order to get a warrant, an officer makes an application. It needs to be signed by their inspector, their duty officer. You know, for a uniform officer, it's a duty officer, inspector. For a detective, it'll be their DI, the governor, as we used to call it.
Sure.
And she kept getting it refused. In the end, whether she got a friendly one or she forged a signature, I can't rightly remember, but she got the warrant, and hence the reason they found body parts. But one of the things that also was seized was that there was over 900 homemade videotapes, some of them believed to be snuff movies. There were homemade pornos. There was child porn, all homemade stuff. And hardly any of it was viewed. And the majority of it was destroyed without ever being viewed.
Jesus. And
now,
how common was huge hordes of that abuse material being found at the time? You know, was there an attention on that sort of abuse material at the time, or was this
more so back then because it was a rarity? You know, now there's more and more ways to sort of detect, and there's dedicated units set up to deal with child pornography. Back then, it was very rudimentary, and it was a rarity, and you know, it was videotapes as well, so it's very bulky as well. So,
yeah, absolutely.
In one way, it was easy, and one way, it was more difficult. But
I'm with you.
You know, it was in its infancy, but it wasn't as common as it is now. But it did happen, and you know, and when you get tapes, you know, you seize tapes, you've got a duty to view them. You know, we would spend hours and hours and hundreds of hours and days and weeks and months viewing child pornography and grading it. And there was a way of doing it. There's a set way of doing it, and you have to be trained in it. But they would have had the expertise. Even a rural force like Gloucestershire, you know, they could have gone to a national unit or even gone to the Metropolitan Police's Obscene Publications Unit, which I served under for a while. But, you know, it doesn't seem to be the case. So for me, it stinks of real wrongdoing at a very sort of high judicial level here, which would then indicate why they seem to get away with it. Now, the other thing.
Well, if we're talking about a bunch of VHS tapes and people that are prolific for throwing parties, we could argue that there was some people on those tapes that maybe didn't want that being seen, and that's why they were destroyed. I mean,
yeah, exactly. You know, and again, did Fred record this with their knowledge, or was it covertly recorded? And if it was covertly recorded, well, that would have huge blackmail value, and that will pretty much cement your get out of jail free card. You know, and this guy was always portrayed as being some thick yokel, you know, who hasn't got two brain cells to rub together. That's not the case. This was a very devious, sophisticated criminal.
Yeah.
And you know, and so another thing which came out when the whole investigation was looked at was in that area during the period of time when the West were very active. There were 390 missing persons in that area, and 100 of them were taken very seriously. Right, so 100 so a quarter of them, you know, that were looked at as being some sort of criminal connection to people going missing, and they were people going missing that would have come under the what is it? You know, like the profile of the victims. So it's that demographic is a word I'm on about. So they come under that demographic. That their files went missing, right? So that stinks again. That stinks. So potentially we could be looking here at many times, not the 10 that they copped, right? Not the 10 that they copped. We could be looking at nearly 400, so 40 times that amount. Now, the other interesting, very interesting thing that came out of this, right? And this is something that I thought, wow, this is unbelievable. Where that a lot of the bodies, when they found them, they had their digits missing, their fingers and their fingernails missing. They would find piles of fingernails clustered in one area from different victims. So fingernails what were taken off them and kept as some sort of trophy, right? Now that could be some sort of very sadistic, torturous thing to do, but it has another significance. So if we look into the worlds of the occult, then that's known as degloving. It's got a term. It's called degloving, right? And there is a festival, and it's to do with the hands and the fingers, right? If you ever seen the film The Wicker Man, the original film The Wicker Man,
how many women are we talking about, John?
Maybe 400.
Okay. With their nails removed.
Now some of the parallels that I'm drawing here, right now. Fred's son, when he was interviewed, said that my father was involved in a cult, and there was many of them, and he was involved in something called the Barn Club. So there was information that Fred would take these victims to a barn. There were 2 barns that he would use, right? The bodies were taken there. They were disused farm warehouses, and over a period of days, this cult would meet. And over a period of days, the victims would be tortured and killed, and then their bodies disposed of, right? And then digits removed and various body parts removed. Now, having spent the last few years interviewing victims and survivors of satanic, the parallels to what I've heard there and to what I've been told by the survivors of SRA are totally and utterly uncanny, right? Barns always used, rituals that span days, and victims being itinerant people, runaways, kidnapped people.
It all took place again geographically around the area of Fred West.
Yeah.
Again, you see, when you lay it out the way that you do, John, and you go into the detail, and we start getting one of these mental spider webs in our head where things are tying together. It's amazing how many of these high profile, open inverted commas, killers, serial killers, monsters, whatever we want to call them, seem to have evidence that goes walkabout and links to more than one horrific occurrence in their area. And the more I talk to you, the more I think, who are these people? How are they getting away with it? And who else is involved?
Well, there was a guy who did a study on it. He's a satanic cult expert from Northern Ireland. And his conclusion is straightforward. He says that this couple were Satanists, and the removal of finger bones and nails ties in very, very closely with known satanic rituals. And on top of that, they call in their bar the Black Magic Bar. And Fred, when he was arrested, stated that he would talk to the devil. And when they took him to search the home, he would say that the spirits of those he murdered still talk to him, and he can hear them talking in the house. And he claimed to be a devil worshipper. So even out of his own, admission, this has come out. Now, the other thing which I found really, really fascinating, right? So we've got a husband and wife team here. We've got many, many missing people. We've got confirmed murders.
Yeah.
We've got sexual deviancies. We've got sexual parties.
Yeah.
We've got members of the judiciary, the establishment involved in sex orgies, involved in drinking parties. We've now got mentions of ritualistic abuse in barns, body parts going missing, right? So this is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So this isn't just sex orgies, so sex orgies with children. It now involves the torture, the murder, the sadistic, right, and then occultic killings. On top of that, whilst on remand, Fred hangs himself, right, and leaving Rose to get the 10 life sentences that she did. Now, if we look back at recent history, where else have we had a guy and a woman involved or allegedly involved in the trafficking of children to remote locations with people high up in the
Oh,
establishment?
of course. We're talking about the one who can't be named.
Yes,
It rhymes with Mepspleen. Do you know
yeah,
what I'm saying?
Fleckstein or something.
Yeah,
Yeah,
something
yeah,
like
that.
that.
Yeah. Very. I mean, the parallels are incredulous.
We've talking about the things that have gone on around the West, and how already from day one they were sort of destined for something horrific. Put into context for everybody the extent of what their victims went through, John. Because talking about the Barnes and talking about what individuals have went through that we supposedly think that they went through. For those who don't know this case, these killings were not, it wasn't. No killing is a pleasant experience, but these were pretty sadistic killings, right?
Yeah, they were. I mean, fingernails removed. There were signs of sexual torture. I don't know the full extent of the pathology reports on that. The bodies were dismembered. There's not too much information, but there have been a couple of people who actually survived.
Yeah.
And they go on to say about sadistic sexual beatings,
Yeah.
being tied down, in which both Fred and Rose took part. One of the girls, I think it was Heather,
Yeah.
Rose killed her by stamping on her head. From what I know about ritualistic abuse, if any of them are taken to the barn, then they would have been sacrificed to a
Yeah.
deity and mutilated.
Well, this is exactly why I wanted you to go over that, John, because when we talk about the heinousness of what's going on around these people, it's exactly what they're doing. We're talking about two individuals who are doing this in their home, and we have evidence all around from as you say, these ritualistic abuse cases, and I refer to that category of people as lesser dead in the eyes of the law. If you're going to try and get away with a crime like that, pick somebody that no one's going to talk about being missing. The homeless, sex work, they go missing all the time. And the brutality of the West's killings is just emulated in the cases that you're referring to about the parties, the sexual violence, the brutality, dismembering. It all fits their MO, and this has
Yeah,
just
yeah.
followed them from town to town.
And also, if Fred was an active Satanist and he was the procurer and organizer of the rituals, he's a big risk. He's a major risk once he gets caught. So there's a need to get rid of him. And I mean, and the other thing you get with people that come from ritualistic abuse backgrounds, they end up with a disassociation, a thing called DID. And part of that is that, when it all comes on top, they get an inclination to commit suicide because there is that mind control
Yeah,
pre-programmed element
yeah,
to it.
of course.
And all their inner alters turn on themselves and tell them to commit suicide, or something more sinister went on. Someone else did it for him. But he would, without a doubt, be a major risk to the security of the coven once he's arrested. May not be during the trial, but he's then going to languish for the rest of his life in a cell. Now, he could well find Jesus and turn to Christianity, and then he may then have an onus and an inclination to start talking and purge himself. Again, that can't happen as far as they're concerned. So,
Of course.
he's a big major risk, and if anyone believes what happened to this guy on the Caribbean islands, who's friends with one of our family of the monarchy, then a very similar outcome
Yeah.
occurred there. They really people really need to start looking a bit deeper into to Fred and Rose West, and the fact that, look, if someone gets caught shoplifting, right? They get caught. It's not the first time they've been shoplifting.
Yeah.
And it probably won't be the last time they'll be shoplifting. Not to draw a parallel between shoplifters and murderers, but I'm just giving an example that what you get caught for is a small percentage of what you've done. Now, there are those that commit one murder, and that's the only crime, and will only be the only crime that they'll ever commit. And that's why murders have got a 96% cover up rate, because you get crimes of passion, domestic violence, when people lose the plot, kill the other half, and then they're deeply sorry and remorseful for it, and they put their hands up straight away. They're not what we're on about. We're on about serial killers here. We're on about a hedonistic,
100%.
power orientated, control orientated couple, not just one, a couple.
Yeah.
So we've got a very, very volatile and dangerous mix here. And when you've got the woman and you've got a big family, you can portray yourself as being some sort of loving, kind,
Well, that's
matriarchal.
it. I mean, for the time as well, the least people that would be suspected of crimes are a married family.
Of
During that
course,
time, and the mask of your wife being able to hide behind that, uh, it was a real thing of the time. This was before the profiling even begun, and it's it's insane just how long these
I mean,
careers last
but
in
when
that
we
era.
look, you look at what sells. We've got Airbnb. People don't want the big corporate hotels now. They want the family, the local family sort of experience with home cooked food. It's all about the home. Being in someone's home, eating home cooked food is better than some sterile corporate hotel. So it's that warmth, loving uh,
Yeah,
family sort of
correct.
that it's displaying, but it's a deception and it's a lie. And of course, if you're coming from an itinerant, troubled, dysfunctional background, and all of a sudden you find yourself in this so-called sort of loving, kind family environment, then you think you've really hit jackpot. But of course, the grooming and manipulating process starts very, very discreetly and slowly.
Yeah,
But the goal is really to show the inner beast, and this is what happens for those that have survived it. That's what they said. Oh, they were so kind and loving to start with, and then after a couple of weeks, Fred become very tactile and perverted, and Rose was just as bad. And then they sort of virtually convinced them that this is how it is. This is how normal families are. Um, and if you come from damage, then you might be more inclined to accept that. And so it's that that's how they had such a good run of it. And if they are caught in with the police, and if he is an informant, that information is going two ways. So they're going to say to him, "Look, Fred, we had a rumor. Someone's saying that you're a bit of a pervert or whatever. Just letting you know." And what you
yeah,
got for us, Fred? It's called reciprocity. I give you
yeah.
something, you give me something, and that's how the system works.
Of
And
course.
he was coming across. Look, it's a wise man that plays the fool. Um, so he was playing
Yeah,
the idiot,
of
but
course.
this was a very calculated. Look, there was a case of a guy called Delroy Denton back in the 80s, who was a yardie that came over here from Jamaica over the what they called the crack wars. They had like a civil war really going on, a political civil war going on in Jamaica, and out of that come the yardie gangsters, which were really the henchmen for a party called the JLP, the Jamaican Liberation Party, and they were funded by the importation and distribution of drugs, and these become very highly trained and conditioned killers. These guys, and they came over here to make some money, send it back, and some got caught up and stayed here and just carried on their gangster lifestyle. But these are tough Jamaican yardie boys. And Delroy Denton was one of them, and
Yeah,
he became an informant for the police because they couldn't really crack that little scene, and he got caught, gave up information. But what happened with him? He was given information which was a lot lower than what he was involved in. So they thought he was just involved in drug dealing. So he was giving them a gun here and there, but he was actually involved in murders, and they never knew. So, and they were giving him special privileges. So, and it's a it's a benchmark case, this Delroy Dent, and it sort of changed the way police dealt with informants. But we're predating that with Fred. So he's going into the early years when there wasn't many rules around how informants were dealt with, and the boundaries were quite elastic, as it were. So he was probably playing the police off. And once you've got someone in a sexually compromising situation, then that's it. No, that's game over for them.
Of course.
You know, they really are your puppet from that then on in. And I seriously reckon this was happening. And if we put him to meet the pedophile porno film club that he was running, and you know the coppers going around there and having it off with his missus, and he's pretty much sewn that whole town up. You know, when it comes to doing what he wants.
Yeah, and as we talked about so many times, you know, when we talk about the era, that era, you're not gonna, if you are one of these horrific monsters and you're going to these parties and you're doing these things, the last thing you're thinking about is the previous case of when a whole bunch of people were busted, or the technology that would be, you know, recording you or anything at the time. I think the capabilities of gathering that evidence is so prominent during that time period, and again it reflects exactly that man who had that island, who did that, you know, who died in a similar way. And it's fascinating when you genuinely see those comparisons in the broader picture.
What we're seeing now as well, the other element which is fueling this more than the hedonistic perverted club will be if there is a cult, a satanic cult running here, because there will be a need for blood sacrifices. Now, we've seen in the last year 2 former New York detectives have now blown the whistle on the existence of satanic ritual abuse within the American subculture and criminal underworld.
Can you get into the things that you witnessed as a child?
Child trafficking. My parents were my they tutored me, they took child of me, and they also, some of the abuse would be considered by some people satanic ritual abuse. Being placed in a coffin with a corpse.
Was it just any corpse?
It was my sister. I didn't show any signs of abuse. I was the best dressed kid in class. I mean, my mom would make my clothes, and I mean, I looked like I was very well nourished, and so we looked like the perfect family. We went to church all the time. The only way you're going to detect the kind of abuse I experienced with such intelligent and evil parents as I had is through investigations. When you're abused like I was abused, having a good person in your life means so much. It means so much more than anyone would think. People want to rescue children, I get it. And I do too. But there's some children you may not be able to rescue, but you can still save their life just by being good.
And that could be the thing that makes them feel like life is worth living?
Yes, it did for me. It absolutely did for me.
Do you think that people are born evil, or do you think they become evil?
I know for a fact they were abused, and so they did the same thing that was done to them. One way I know that my mother was abused by her father is I saw my mother have sex with my maternal grandfather. It happened enough that he would go into my mother's bedroom with him, and they would give me chocolate chip cookie dough, and so that would be to distract me, so I would eat the chocolate chip cookie dough. But one time they had me come in, and my mother's reaction, instead of being protective, she beat me after that was over, because she said, I'm his only special little girl.
I hope you're enjoying the podcast. Here's a word from our sponsor, Manscaped. Cannonballs. This summer, it's not about the size of those cannonballs.
Thank God, as I can barely see them.
Well, they were big enough to do the job, weren't they, Jen? We kicked. It's about making a splash with our friends at Manscaped.
Prep for barbecue season by making sure your grill master has the hottest dog seen this summer.
When you're at the cookout, let the meat speak for itself with Manscaped's Performance Package 4.0.
It's time to get ready and not sweaty.
The Manscaped Performance Package 4.0 has everything you need to guarantee you'll have the most mouth-watering treat at the party. They have built the ultimate bundle for your summer grooming. So, get 20% off and free shipping with the code SHAUN20, SHAUN20 at manscaped.com. That's 20% off with free shipping at manscaped.com and use code Sean20. Manscaped, the perfect way to get your patties sizzling hot this summer. Hoo-ha! Thanks for supporting our sponsor. Back to the podcast.
There was a barrister who had an input into the training of detectives, and she was a survivor of ritual abuse and went on to become a highly acclaimed criminal barrister. And part of her input to training detectives was if you get anything in a graveyard, which is involved a murder or there's defacing or something like that, you must look at satanic ritual motivated crime. And she was the first one to do it. It didn't last long before someone of a questionable background, I'll leave it at that, stopped her from teaching this, and it was well received and she was well liked.
Yeah.
Now, if that's the case, that Fred was involved in this would easily account for the missing 390 missing person files. Easily account for that.
Agreed. Can I just ask somebody like yourself, John, right, who's a hardened believer in the topic of SRA?
Yeah.
Listen, let's just go full tinfoil hat with this, right? So if we have this SRA group and it spans the world and it's elites and powerful people, okay?
Yeah.
How do you feel, John, about what's happening in the music industry over the last year with how artists are performing on stage and these rituals that seem to be going on? As a hardened believer, what does that say to you, John? Just take us through this.
Yeah, they've sold their soul. And they've sold their soul for a cheap way out because they want fame and fortune. And there's been many people have done that. I mean, Bob Dylan's said that he's done it, that he sold his soul. Established artists that have either said it direct or alluded to the fact that they have had an alignment to the cult. And look at Aleister Crowley. Look at the influence he had on the music industry, and especially in respect to people like the Beatles and Ozzy Osbourne.
Well, I understand. So we can agree that this has been going on for years, then decades, with the music industry.
Of course, yeah.
Why have we seen such a huge increase? When we talk about satanic symbolism and selling your soul, that's one thing. How do you feel about the fact that we're actually seeing ritualistic processes out on stage?
Because we've lost our way. Years ago, we was a Christian society and we were strong in our beliefs. That's gone. People don't believe. They're, every decade it drops by a quarter. It's going down and down and down. We're becoming an atheistic belief system. People are their God. They're false idols. Well, look at a pop idol. You've only got to see that. They worship celebrities. They worship their flat screen telly. They worship their iPhone. I mean, the devil's already done his work. So if people don't believe in God, then they can basically do what they want, and people just think, oh, it's just art. It's just this. Well, it's not. And a lot of it is Baal worship. This is going back to antiquity. This is going Babylonian times. This is going right back, to the dawn of civilization time. Baal worship, and this is what we're seeing: the worship of these demonic entities, these ancient demonic entities. So it's it's there, but people will, they'll never believe it. They don't want to believe it, but
that's
what? That's up to them. There's no so blind as those that don't see, and what can you do about it? But you don't believe in God, but I'm telling you something: the devil believes in you. And I generally think that Fred West was a fixer. I give a talk about the hierarchy of Satanism. I think he was a fixer and a procurer, and he would go out there and he would get for huge financial reward. He would get these victims, children and adults, for blood sacrifice and ritual, and that a part of that will be orgies, perversion, torture, and death. Again, look, we've got 10 women, 10 bodies. And if we're looking at 400, well, where's the other 390?
This backstory you've painted for us is such a critical insight into what created these two and what facilitated them, and our theory about them being fixers. Just touch a little bit about their victims and their crimes and what brought them down.
There's 10 victims, okay, and they include their own children, right? And these were found. Well, they've actually got 12 victims, but
officially, but I mean, effectively, it could be 400. I mean, as we've
yeah,
discussed this evening.
that's right. You know, so it's and you know that they vary in ages. You know, 4 of the victims were aged 15 to 21, and also, you know, that they some were their kids and some were lodgers, some were ex lovers of Fred's. You know, there was one, um, and she was pregnant, and when her body was found, there was no, you know, there was no baby with her.
Oh,
She was
wow.
heavily pregnant.
I mean,
her name was Anne McFall,
I think,
and
I think
you
we're all
know,
thinking the same
she was an
thing
18-year-old. She was a nanny that worked for them, and yeah, she was pregnant, and her remains, and but the unborn baby was found away from her body.
Oh,
That
that's
she
horrible.
was found in a field. There was his ex-partner, Rena Costello, who he had the 2 children with. You know, her remains were found in a field as well, because he did start telling them, you know, the places where he'd find them. And then you had his daughter Charmaine. This is when Fred was he was in prison for theft of car tires and a tax disc, and her body was buried sort of in the back garden of a house in Midland Road, which was slightly away from where they ended up in Gloucester Street. Linda Goff is an interesting one. Linda Goff was her mum always tried to find her, and her body. I think she left sort of the London area, and ended up sort of down in Gloucester, and she went off as a missing person, and her remains were found in like a car inspection pit that Fred had made, and when they found a body, a skull was like wrapped up in a tape, and there were in her body, in her nasal cavity, were 2 straws, so it looked like he'd actually put straws up her nose and then gaffer taped her whole head.
Oh.
So she was basically sort of mummified in gaffer tape, and there was indication that her body had been hung up as well, because they found sort of like cord embedded into her body, and it looks like she may have been suspended from wooden beams. So, you know, it's sick. These are the ones that they found. I mean, Fred went on to say that there were more from the barns, and they're buried near the barns.
Wow.
But a lot of these were lodgers and that. I mean, there was another one, a girl called Carol Ann Cooper, again a former kids' home resident, and she sort of warmed to the west, and her body was found in the cellar of Cromwell Street. Again, she was just really looking for comfort and a family environment, and she come across them two nutcases. Lucy Partington, university student. Again, I think she was a bit of a hitchhikery type person, and her remains were found beneath the floor, beneath the cellar as well. I think she's the one, if I remember rightly, she's the one who sort of had enough of them and walked out and left. And they found her hitchhiking and apologised to her, put her back in the car, and took her back and murdered her.
That's right.
You know, there's another one called Teresa. I think she's the girl from Switzerland, and she was over here, and she was sort of making her way to Ireland, and she never got there, you know, and she was again, she went down as a missing person for many, many years by the Metropolitan Police.
Yeah.
And her remains were found in the cellar again. Shirley Hubbard, she's only a 15-year-old, very vulnerable girl. And she too went missing. She left her work, travelling home.
Yeah.
So it looks like they've abducted her. Her remains found under the cellar. Juanita Mott.
Yeah.
She again another. She was a local girl. She was from a little town called Newen.
Yeah.
And she went missing. And her body again was found in the cellar. Again, she was a missing person for a long time. Shirley Ann Robinson, another young girl, last seen in 1978. Her body and her unborn child were found buried in the garden. So again, we're seeing the same pattern.
Yeah.
Pregnant, and Alison Chambers, 16-year-old, known as a bit of a rebellious teenager.
What's interesting?
She actually worked for a solicitor's firm. She disappeared in 1978. Remains were found in the garden. And then we got Heather West, which is their daughter. This is the one where, one of the children said that they saw Rose, that Rose and Fred's first child. They saw Rose stamped on her head, killed her by stamping on her own daughter's head.
Yeah, it's when we consider how much went on in the home and how many bodies were there and how many were out with the home and the extent of the era, the abuse rings, the people have gone missing, this serial killer mindset and the drive that these two had when they connected with each other fueled this. And you were making a point earlier about how when they came together, it was really, that was when things went nuclear. And when we talk about the serial killer mindset and we then add in the fact that these could be fixers, it really changes everything for me. And the West have always been a fascinating topic, but tell us a little bit about our next individual, John, if you can.
My fears are that as Mark hasn't been found, there are other children in graves hidden away around the country that could be as a result of the actions of Cooke and his fellow like-minded people. He is the Hannibal Lecter. He is an evil, evil man.
Yeah, I mean, this is someone that I've sort of indirectly had a lot of interest and dealings with. This is someone who got mentioned to me by many survivors of the care home abuse, and potentially he might have murdered. A case I was recently looking at involving two boys that went missing, and also a guy I know, his brother went missing, and there were rumours that Cooke and his co were involved in that. Now, this guy, his name is Sidney Cooke, born in 1927, aka Hissing Sid, and he was a ringleader of a group called the Dirty Dozen, and these were child molesters, child abductors, and child serial killers.
We had a right horrible, nasty. We used to have to call him Uncle Sid. His name was Sidney Cooke. Sidney Cooke. If he come into freeways in a dress, we'd have to call him Auntie Sid. If he had his trousers unshorn, we had to call him Uncle Sid. Remember a shovel, wooden shovel with a handle, kind of does that. So he kind of took me trousers and pants down, pushed me on the swing, pushed me over the swing. He let John Beecham rape me in front of the staff. They were looking out the windows. The kids were looking at as well. And then Sidney put when John finished, the wooden handle of the shovel into my backside. And that's why I got problems now. Because you got a cock shit on the bottom, and on mine I got a bit of a chip in it.
Cooke is now serving 2 life sentences for various crimes against children, involving 2 manslaughters and rape, indecent assault, times many, and he's had his parole refused on 10 occasions. Now Cooke and Co. The police always believed that there was 12 of them, hence the tag, the Dirty Dozen. But he was more known under the target of Operation Orchid, which was Metropolitan Police led operation into the abduction and murder of 3 children in particular. Now, the victims of this group, Cooke and Co. So we're looking at the ones they know about: Cooke, a guy called Leslie Bailey, another guy called Robert Oliver, and another guy called Steve Barrell. So you've got this 4. Now, Cooke, Bailey, and Oliver, they went forward to there's legislation regarding the grading of child pornography, which is came out of the investigation into this lot. One of their victims that was the most known was a lad called Jason Swift, and he was murdered in 1985. Cooke was an itinerant fairground worker. Again, he comes from a perverted, dysfunctional, brutal background. He's a low achiever. Apparently, he was a man of incredible strength for his build. He's a Weasley-looking guy, and he would just go around the country picking up young boys. He did come to notice of the police for indecency in toilets and things like that. But again, back then they never took things that seriously, and also really bizarrely, and we've touched on this in the past. Offences of men against men in public toilets, known as cottaging, indecent assault, importuning, and it really basically a cottage is a public toilet where men would meet and they would, let's be vernacular about this, suck it off, glory hole in whatever you want to call it. It's a disgusting thing to do in toilets, especially when these are places where young kids go to relieve themselves, and there's men that doing this stuff, and they were always a pickup place for these perverts to get hold of runaway kids.
Of course. Again, it's an era thing though, because the connotations of public toilets that have come from these cases and these eras are the reasons why most people steer well clear, unless it's maybe like in a train station or whatever. Do you know what I mean?
Well, one notorious set of toilets, there was a thing called the meat rack. And the meat rack was an area of Piccadilly Circus, which used to be by the Wimpy Bar. And this is where the young boys, known as the chickens, or young rent boys, the young prostitutes, were placed. So what you'd get is the pimps would display the kids in the upstairs window, and the punters would come and pick out the ones they wanted. And off they go. There's a set of toilets that actually had showers in them. That was a huge mecca for perverts. And I worked on the Clubs and Vice unit, the street offences team, which dealt with the runaway kids, the juvenile prostitutes, and the rent boys. I worked for a few years on that.
Yeah.
Very successfully. I worked the meat rack. I spent many, many months on the streets of the nights patrolling around these areas in central London. I spent half my sort of working life at that period on there. Streets I got to know very well, and the MO of the kids, the rent boys, the juvenile prostitutes, and the perverts, got to know them inside out. And I spoke to so many survivors from the care homes that ended up on the streets and end up working as rent boys, and they'd tell me the dangers and what they've been through, and how many friends they've lost that they never saw again, that they know were killed sadistically.
It's the amount of stories that we have that, you said one earlier about one of the 4 of his friends got in a car and they were never seen again. Like those are the things that nobody wants to believe. These are the things that only exist in that realm of the world, and you must have heard that more often than you'd like to admit.
And these are murders, and these kids' bodies are somewhere, and they've no, and these are kids that came from the care homes, and no one cared about them. And there was the book written called Playland, and it's worth reading, and it's about one guy called Anthony Daly and his life as a rent boy, and he was being taken to one place, and this fella was he was the CEO of WH Smith's. It's out there in the book. I'm not saying anything that's legally a minefield, and he was sort of an ex officer in the guards or something. Ended up the CEO of WH Smith, and he was having this relationship with this young rent boy, and he would tell about what went on, the goings on that went on, and we've seen it come out in the IICSA inquiry when parties would be held in the St James's area of Mayfair, in Belgravia, and all sorts, and kids were whipped and beaten, and these were kids from the streets, and people doing them were politicians, were people from high up in the army. We hear about the guards officers all the time, and I'm going to give a true account here. There was a guy, and he was a male prostitute, and he was always frequenting the central London area, around by where the guards barracks were. And he said to me one day, he said, I've had so many of these these guards and the high ranking ones, as his client. I said, you're joking? He went, no, so many. So I've been in every single one of these barracks, having sex with these guys. It's just
you've told stories as well of victims who were abused by judges as children, and were
one guy, and when he was convicted of a series of armed robberies, the guy who sent him down for an extremely large sentence was someone who used to frequent the kids' home and anally him when he was a child. And I've heard from another guy who went on to become a hard man, an underworld enforcer, and he said, one of the worst abusers I had was a judge from the Crown Court Sessions area in Surrey. I hear it all the time, the same things. There's no coincidence, and do I believe them? Yes, I do. And the consistency, the MO, the narratives, I can almost write it without them telling me anything, because it's all the same. And the legal system beats them down because they are people that have got discreditable conduct. There are people of what legally are termed as dishonest because they've got convictions for theft. And they got convictions for theft because they were drug addicts, because they turned to drugs as an analgesic to stifle the pain and the trauma that they endured as kids being.
Hope you're enjoying the podcast. Here's a word from our sponsor, AG1. Why do you like AG1 so much, Jem?
So before I start my morning routine, I always have a glass of AG1 with my coconut water to kickstart my day.
We drink it literally every day.
And that's because AG1 helps build your health first foundation up.
Why take a bunch of different things when you can just mix one scoop of powder in water every day? AG1 replaces your multivitamin, probiotic, and more in one simple drinkable habit. If you want to take ownership of your health, try AG1 and get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D and 5 free AG1 travel packs with your first purchase. Go to drinkag1.com/Sean, SHAUN. That's drinkag1.com/Sean. Check it out. Thanks for supporting our sponsor AG1. Link is in the description box.
By these monsters. So, and we're talking again, runaway kids. We're seeing the same. Sidney Cooke and the Dirty Dozen. People really need to do their research with this guy. This is a very sinister individual indeed. He got convicted, him and his group, of manslaughter, only manslaughter, of the murder of 3 kids: Mark Tilsley, Barry Lewis, and Jason Swift, young boys. Jason Swift become the more prominent one that got known about. Mark Tilsley's best friend contacted me and really opened his heart to me about what his friend went through at the hand of Sidney Cooke and the others, and how the police didn't do their job properly. It was a very interesting conversation I had with him. Mark Tilsley was a young lad that was abducted from a fair down in, I think, Woking or Weybridge down in Surrey. Cooke lured him away with the promise of a bag of sweets from a fun fair, and his poor body was found some weeks later in the Essex area. Barry Lewis was a little boy that was just walking home on a housing estate in southeast London, and again his broken, abused, battered little corpse was found near enough in the same area. And again, what you've got to look at is when bodies are dumped, that is a crime scene in itself. And you've got to look at not only how the body is dumped, but also where it's dumped. Now, what a killer will do, they will take the body to somewhere that they feel at ease with, right? They feel comfortable there. So whoever dumped the body there is someone that's probably from that area or had a childhood in that area, that had a connection with that area and felt at ease in that area. And that's why they do it. So whenever you get these patterns, you've got to look, there's always a reason why.
In some sense, it must be to be close to the scene as well. A lot of these killers like to revisit or be around the areas where they either dump or the crime's committed as well. It must have a connection factor too. Obviously, that they're disposing of the body, but to some extent, those who could dump them far away but leave them closer, it must be a want and need to be close to what they've done, maybe.
Well, there's many reasons for it, but when they get rid of the body, they obviously don't want to get caught, but they'll go to somewhere where they're familiar and they feel comfortable, because they're putting themselves at risk, because they're basically cool, with a smoking gun in their hand. If anyone turns up and they've got a rolled up body in a carpet, and in the middle of the night they're digging a hole, there's only one thing that can mean. So they've got to know that the area and comfortable that they can dispose of that body and not be caught and not have a dog walker go by or something else. If you go to an area you don't know, you're putting yourself at extreme risk. But if you know that area, you're like, well, I know it. We went there as kids. There's no one ever goes there. We'll get away with this. Jason Swift, again, we've got to look at these victims. And the victims, again, there's a victimology here. A lot of them are kids that come from troubled backgrounds. These are kids that are always on the street. There's something missing in their life. And when someone shows them a little bit of affection, they warm to it very closely. And kids, what we as adults call a friend is an established relationship. You buy a kid an ice cream, he's your friend.
Of course, yeah.
So the context of a friend from a child's mouth and from an adult's mouth, they're two different things.
And as well,
it's easy to make friends with the child, and these groups know it.
Yeah.
Jason Swift was in and out the care system. There was problems at home. Dad wasn't at home. Mum had issues. Put in and out of care. He wasn't the brightest tool in the box. He was always around central London.
Yeah.
Again, he's now in that zone. And these predators are always about, they go to the arcades, they go to the toilets, they go this, they buy them burger, buy them chips, buy them this, buy them that, become their friends, and then they start renting them.
Yeah.
And this is how it works. But they see them as a friend, and they're giving them that they will drug the kid as well. They will give them muscle relaxant so they can have the mechanics of rape that go with it to these finely tuned people. They know what they're doing. But ultimately, this is a wolf pack. They are not just satisfied with the of that child.
No,
this goes to another level. Their goal is to kill. Right? They want to kill. And there's a case that I come across, and it was a fella. He was a school teacher, and he'd befriended a young lad, and he'd arranged to meet this kid after school. And people think, oh, it's going to be just for some sort of underage relationship. But what he does and says he's doing and what his actual intention are two different things. This guy's intention, and they only found this out when they did an analysis on his computer and on a diary that he kept, wasn't just to have sex with this young boy. He was involved in a group, a bit like what we're dealing with here, Cooke and Co.
Yeah, okay.
Right? What it was for him and the group to rape this boy to the point of death and then dismember his body. And that was his fantasy. And he'd actually prepared the boot of his car and lined it with plastic and everything in order to deal with the aftermath of that.
Wow.
And this would always be the argument. They'd say when you deal with someone in authority that was alleged to be involved, like a school teacher, alleged to be involved, an allegation's been made that they're a paedophile, there's been a sexual assault. Well, you don't know that to start with. It's a fact finding, and false allegations are made. Malicious allegations are all made, and 98% of rapes don't go anywhere. And this might sound controversial, but because there's no founding, there's an acrimony behind them. They're a failed relationship and things like that. But there is that percentage that are, and that they need to be dealt with properly. So, and that the burden of proof is very, 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 very high.
It's very, it's difficult.
This is what we've got to look at. But this group, that was their job. So they got convicted of these three boys, but there were many, many more. Cooke even admitted to someone that he'd done 15. Now, Cooke was itinerant, and his abusing, it spanned from London, Berkshire, Kent, Tyne Wear, Hertfordshire. It's got all over the place. I can even tie him in with a guy called Brian Fields, and Brian Fields again, he's a child killer. He's a child abductor and a child killer. And I was looking at him, and I had meetings with West Midlands Police about him as near back as 2 years ago.
You know,
because I believed he was involved in the abduction
with all these
and the
people,
murder of two boys from the West Midlands
that are near each other and have connections. You know, there's not a club for them all. There's not a murder club. So the fact that these guys could be fixers and the fact that they could be connected to each other just bolsters the fact that
of course
someone's introduced them.
Look, these people know each other, and they're connected.
How do we not know that Fred West and his wife weren't set up and match made by?
Yeah, and
do you see what I mean?
They might all know each other. We just, it doesn't get out. We don't know. It's one of them things where I don't think enough research is done into it, enough intelligence gathering is done into it. But when you get serial killing, I think you've got to look at a bigger picture going on. And you know, Cooke and his lot would hold these parties in which a kid would just be brought in and would be raped and murdered to death. Sidney Cooke had a thing where he would be able to asphyxiate a child and then revive the child. He was an expert at giving CPR. I talked to one police officer that, see, these prisoners, they get visited sometimes once a year by detectives to ask them to eventually tell them the full story. And Cooke, I was told by one copper that used to visit him that he, even when he was in his 70s, he was in a cell and the window was like 6 foot off the ground. It was like these concrete glazed bricks, and there was a tiny little ledge, and they don't know how he used to do it, but he used to climb up on there at his late, almost octogenarian age, and sit there and spend his whole day and I reckon he would up to 17 times a day.
Yeah,
this is a guy with an extremely high sex drive. And if you imagine that driven with the perversion and the sadistic mindset, and not just him, many others, this is why they call them a wolf pack. And this is what they were doing. They were picking on these vulnerable kids from broken backgrounds.
Hello and welcome to our dispatches update. I'm here with officers from forces from the south of England. Detectives and counsellors have been taking calls ever since 3 hours ago. Dispatches presented evidence the police believe links Sidney Cooke to child sex murders and appealed for new evidence about his activities. There's been an overwhelming response. Usually the police use television to appeal for information to help them find the perpetrator of a crime, but in this case the police make no secret of their prime suspect. Earlier this evening, dispatches chronicled the disturbing story of Sidney Cooke and the paedophile gang he led. These men are members of a paedophile gang who tortured and killed a child. Most will soon be out of prison. Sidney Cooke was the leader of the gang, yet he is already a free man and already has plans for the gang to meet again.
They are killers. And they kill for sexual pleasure. It's as simple as that.
Cooke was jailed so that children would be protected from him. Now he's at liberty. How safe are they?
He will never ever stop abusing children. He has an incredible sexual appetite. And even now, I am certain that he will need some sort of sexual gratification.
For years, Sidney Cooke haunted fairgrounds, amusement arcades, seaside pleasure parks, wherever children gather, places where your children may have been. Cooke has been convicted of killing one child, but the police have evidence linking him to the murders of 2 others. In tonight's dispatches, we examined that evidence and appealed for anyone with further information about the gang's activities to ring the police here on this number. Cooke is already one of Britain's most notorious killers. He and his gang took 14-year-old Jason Swift to this flat on East London's Kingsmead estate. Jason died in an orgy of sexual violence. Cooke's police confession was witnessed by a retired Salvation Army officer.
In 73 plus years, I would say he was the most evil man I've ever met.
Cooke has also been linked to the death of 6-year-old Barry Lewis, who was buried in a shallow grave. One of Cooke's gang confessed to the murder and implicated Cooke in Barry's abduction and rape. He said Cooke was also involved in the disappearance of another little boy, 7-year-old Mark Tilsley, from a fair in Wokingham. His body has never been found. His mother has no grave to visit. All she has is a plaque in the churchyard. The files from the Mark Tilsley case represent a 7-year investigation. And as the police now ruefully admit, just so much wasted effort.
I had spent 30 years as a police officer evaluating evidence to take before the courts, and I believed that we had the evidence.
In the course of making this programme, I've met 2 young men who say they were abused by Sidney Cooke. The police believe them, and if their allegations were proved in court, Sidney Cooke would be jailed for life. But the problem is, both are vulnerable, both have severe learning difficulties. They wouldn't make good witnesses. One of them, Terry, talked for the first time with the help of his sister about what happened to him 13 years ago.
Where did he take her?
Bushy.
To where?
Bushy.
The bushes. And what did you do when you was in the bushes? Is that right?
Grounds. And look, when I was looking into Brian Fields and Cooke a couple of years ago, I'd come up with a figure of 30 children that went missing. Now, the police, the West Midlands police, confirmed that they can account for 28. They had a figure of 28, possibly linked to certain individuals. I wasn't far out. I added on the 2 that went missing from the West Midlands, which brought it up to 30. So that's 30 kids that went missing around fairgrounds that were travelling around the country. So when Cooke and his lot were moving around, and of course these kids, they're out at night. Their parents aren't interested where they are. It's, you know, they come in at 12 o'clock. They're still out in the streets. You know, they're not probably.
Do you know
these perverts know
John,
that?
you've just set my brain off again, right? So if we've got a group of individuals that have been introduced to each other by a higher horrific power, and have created this wolf pack, and then you've got another group who are in charge of a certain fairground that security's lackluster on, and there's areas that kids can vanish, and these individuals follow that fairground around. Is that not a plausible, like, what, like, my mind just keeps getting blown and blown, because
and
that makes sense to me.
I actually did take this to the police. I said, listen, there is a record that is kept at the National Archives of these fairgrounds. When they get their showman's license, they have to get it ticked off and stamped, as it were, and they have to put the route that they're going in, and with that route is a copy of the posters that they put out. So you see it with fairgrounds, Bank Holiday Monday at wherever it might be, Streatham Common, and there's copies of these that are supplied with when they apply for the licenses, where they're going to be. So a record is kept, and the Showman's Association keep a record as well of where these fairgrounds are. So, and the problem with police forces is they don't talk to each other. The Met Police think they're better than everyone else. The county forces won't talk to the Met because they think the Met are a load of tossers and they don't want to talk to them. The Scottish forces will talk to absolutely no one. The Welsh police is, again, they don't value the English police. And we saw the same professional arrogance in the case of Marc Dutroux, the Beast of Belgium, who was incredibly similar to both Cooke and to both Fred West. Marc Dutroux was abducting children.
Marc Dutroux, I know.
Yeah.
He is
the Beast of Belgium. And if we can, maybe we'll do something on Marc Dutroux, because Marc Dutroux was a procurer of children. He was a fixer. He went away for the murder of kids. There were many more, but 90 civilian witnesses died in the lead up to the trial.
90?
Right?
90.
90.
What?
Right? The original magistrate who put the case forward for prosecution was sacked. The lead detective was removed, and an inexperienced lead detective was put in. And any witness who had any evidence relating, because these kids all said that there were people from the church, there was police officers, there was that, all of that, then witnesses went missing, and also that information was removed. So the only one who got prosecuted for the abduction and the murders were Marc Dutroux, his missus, and his friend. They get talking to another young girl and they can bring them in, and that's how it all works. So a man on his own would be seen as odd, but if he's got a wife and they've got a young daughter, boom, they've got the ingredients of a loving, caring family.
Correct.
And off they go. And if you this is part of my narrative when I always talk about it, is please keep your families together. Don't break your families up. Don't do it. Don't do it, because the kids get vulnerable. Don't abuse your kids. Don't do it, because what happens is these vultures are out there, and they know, the likes of Sidney Cooke, they know, because they've come from dysfunctionality. They know how it feels, and they can assimilate themselves and align themselves to these kids, and these kids can say, oh, he's like one of us, and he knows, and I know what it feels like, I know what it is, and boom, then they're in, and where they're going to go, and then they get them involved in it, and then they drug them up, they pimp them up, and of course they're too far gone then. Sidney Cooke and his other, there was 9 kids that were linked, 9 child murders in and around London linked to this group, right? They only prosecuted for 3. Cooke was the ringleader. It was well documented and evidence he was a ringleader. And the Crown prosecution, despite all the overwhelming evidence that this was orchestrated and organised and premeditated and pre-planned murder, they ran with manslaughter. Cooke was he was given a 15-year sentence, and he got it reduced. The CPS reduced it by 3 years because they said Cooke could not have possibly been the ringleader when he fucking well was. Right, and they reduced it, for 3 manslaughters. I've got a good friend of mine. I don't know if we can mention him, but he's serving 17 years for a first offence for protecting a child from ritual abuse. And then you've got this guy, Cooke, who's murdered 9 kids, and he gets a 15 years reduced to a 12-year sentence. And it was only he got released, and they released him, right? I think in 1999. Channel 4, God bless them. There's a lot they do I don't like, but Channel 4 did such a sterling job on Cooke and his offending that the police reopened the cases, and it involved the Met Police, Thames Valley, Kent, Northumberland, and Hertfordshire, and they looked at cases and they pieced it all together. And he was arrested, and he pleaded guilty to 4 rapes, 1 buggery, and 3 indecent assaults, and he was given 2 life sentences as a result. Now, not one of them has taken a life, right? Yet he gets 2 life sentences because Channel 4, an independent, investigative journalist organisation, did the job that the police should have done.
Madness, man.
So why did the Met Police not have him for murder? Well, I did know the son of the he's a copper. His dad was the lead investigator, and I think he did have problems even doing that. There was obstruction after obstruction after obstruction, and even when with Cooke, even when they were interviewing Cooke in prison, and he was admitting to the murder and showing how he was killing the children, the prison staff steamed into the room and stopped the interview.
Yeah, it's another case where we've just got suspicious activities, more convincing actions that point towards a deeper connection and story. And it just, like I say, putting this all together and coming to the conclusion that there is so much evidence that points to a ring, an orchestrated group of fixers, and somebody who is introducing these monsters. I wouldn't be surprised if that's how Fred met his wife, and how the Wolf Pack, or whatever the hell they call themselves, were put together as well. Because how else?
Of course.
How else would they have met?
And then you've got the after sales. You've got the video on it. They video it, and the snuff films. Now the British police proclaim that not one officer globally has ever been in possession of a snuff film. That's absolute bullshit. That's a massive lie. The Dutch police have categorically said that snuff films are in existence, and some of them involve English children. They've said it. They've stood up and said it. So the Met Police lie and lie and lie again, and especially they lie when it comes to child murders and child sexual exploitation, pimping out, whatever you want to term it. And I know because I'm testimony to someone who's witnessed that and witnessed the cover up. So when you see this, I'm on point with it. Cooke is an incredibly interesting case to look at. I think there are many, many more murders. I think all anyone's got to do is watch where he was travelling with the funfair, watch where these funfairs went, look at the children that went missing. And I'm not in any way saying that funfairs are child snatchers. I'm not saying that. But where you get kids, amusement arcades, funfairs, scouts, everything, you are going to get the paedophiles. If a guy...
For 30 years, Sidney Cooke was at any number of fairgrounds, funfairs, school fetes, firework displays, where he set up his Test Your Strength machine and offered free rides to some children on other fairground attractions. Does anyone watching tonight remember an incident like that at a fairground 15 or 20 years ago? If you do, please ring us on this number. This has been a unique collaboration between the police and broadcasters, but a collaboration justified and made necessary by an extraordinary case. I'm with Detective Superintendent Trevor Davis. Trevor, what's been the quantity, more importantly, what's been the quality of the calls that have been coming through?
Well, we've had in excess of 100 calls come through so far. As you can see, we're still getting calls coming in at the moment. And there have been some very, very interesting ones.
There was one moment where I actually saw a sort of hush descend and a great sort of moment of concentration happening. That was something quite important.
Yes, we did. One particular call that was related to me concerned a similar MO to that's been used in the past. And my colleagues and I felt that there was certainly something in this particular call. We will be following that up as a priority.
This was a man claiming to have been a sexual victim of Sidney Cooke, then?
Yes, it was. And it is a claim at the moment, as I say. We've run that through our database, and we've got some further research to do. Once we've done the research, which will be done over the next couple of days, then we'll formulate an action.
When you say a similar MO, what sort of things are we talking about?
We're talking about the modus operandi. We're talking about where this person states that he was picked up. Again, fairgrounds come into this. So with taking the picture as a whole, it certainly looks quite interesting.
And you say you've been running through the database. What's this database?
Yes, we've got the Holmes database, our major incident computer database.
Got all the information on this paedophile gang so far, and you're registering what you're getting now against that.
That's right, yes, and this relates to Operation Orchid, which was the original operation run back in 1991.
What do you do now with all this information?
Well, it'll all be sifted through, prioritised, and then we'll then look at how we're going to react to each individual call that we've logged.
And you'll be visiting some of these people?
Some of them, most certainly.
And some of the people who've called you have expressed willingness to be visited. I mean, they're quite open about things.
Yes, they have, yes. There are some calls that have come in that are very, very sad, of course, when dealing with something like this. But others, people have genuinely do want to assist, and they have called in.
We've been talking mostly about Sidney Cooke, but has there been evidence about other gang members in the paedophile gang?
Yes, we have got some other information that may well relate to others.
And that, again, you're going to register against your database, you're going to follow up all that material?
Yes, we have got further research that we need to carry out as a matter of necessity.
On the whole, a useful evening?
On the whole, a very useful evening.
Trevor Davis, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
And thank you for the information that we've received so far, but let's just remind you of the specific information the police are seeking. Sidney Cooke is already one of Britain's most infamous child killers, but some of his victims are still alive, and tonight we revealed details of two young men who said their lives were wrecked by this predatory paedophile. Could there be other victims in your town, in your street, perhaps even inside your house? The police are determined to discover vital new evidence about Cooke's past, especially his time as a fairground worker, an occupation which provided the maximum temptation with the maximum opportunity. Perhaps as a child, you were approached by him. But most importantly, do you know anyone who may have been another of Cooke's victims? Shame and revulsion can overwhelm victims of abuse and force a lifetime of silent suffering. We realize how difficult this may be for you, but if you have information on Cooke, police would like to hear from you. Expert counselling is available. The police will treat any such report with sensitivity, but do call. Lines are open now. No matter how insignificant the information you have to offer, please ring us on this number.
If a guy is a shagger and loves women, right, he's going to go to bars where there's lots of women. He's not going to go to pubs where there's no women. He's going to go ones where there's music that they like, they do their dancing.
I agree.
That's where he's going to go.
Yeah, of course.
And the same with the people. They're going to go where their target is. Their target, and that's as simple as that. And look, these guys that are good at chatting about birds, they tell them how beautiful they are. It's all a lie. They say these things for one reason. They want to get inside their knickers. You know, and people fall for it and listen to it because they've got the gift of the gab, right? The gift of the gammon, whatever they want to term it. And it's the same as a groomer. It's a very similar MO that a groomer uses.
Agreed, yeah.
Incredibly. It's not a monster that grooms a child, right? But it is a monster that abuses them. So the Cooke case, when you want to look at cover-ups, this guy was linked to so many more child murders, and all he cops was minimum sentence for manslaughter. So if we look at 15 years for the manslaughter of 3 children, 15 years, 5 years apiece. That's what a child's life is worth, 5 years apiece. And then we halved that because that's all it will serve.
It's disgusting.
So 2.5 years for the rape, torture, mutilation, dismembering, and the dumping of their corpse, and that's all it's worth. So for me, I'll be looking at the investigative team, the Crown prosecution team, right? Who put the information to the Crown Prosecutor? What did they put on it? Who was the Crown Prosecutor that made this decision? And who was the presiding judge that gave these ridiculously lenient sentences? And who was a judge at the appeal court who even reduced it? And this is what we've got to look at. And there, you've pretty much got your answer.
Well, I think I
so
hear. I think we all understand exactly what you're trying to get at, because, you know, if you're in the club, you're in the club, shall we say? Because it sounds like selected judges, selected individuals will make sure things are contained, and if not, you'll end up like the guy that had the island.
Here is a word from today's sponsor, Aura. If you Google someone, you can find out all kinds of personal information about them. This information is accessible because of data brokers who profit by selling your information to robocallers, telemarketers, spammers. You can use my link, https://aura.com, Aura is AURA, /Sean Atwood, SHAUNATT Wood, to try 2 weeks for free and see how many data brokers are sharing your info. Also linked in my description box on this YouTube version, or scan the QR code on the screen.
Aura also monitors your emails and passwords to see if they were involved in a data breach and exposed on the dark web, and gives you the recommendations on what to do.
Aura has almost every internet safety tool you'll ever need, all inside one app.
Well, exactly. I mean, look, I've like I said, I've seen a friend of mine get 17 years for protecting a child, and of course he committed a crime in doing so, but you know, his mitigation was on point. He was doing what he thought was best to prevent the child from abuse.
Agreed.
I've prosecuted cases where one guy got 10 years for a handful of indecent images. A handful. He got 10 years. So how can we get child murderers for 3 child murders get 15 years?
Yeah,
it doesn't make any sense unless you pencil in that this is a monumental cover-up involving all sorts of people at all sorts of levels, and the stakes are very, very high. Then it makes a whole world of sense. It really does.
It does. In fact, it only makes sense when you apply something like that to.
And we've got to look at Marc Dutroux, because Marc Dutroux case is very, very pivotal in this, because this happened in living memory, and it went from start to finish, and it had massive coverage and huge amounts of cover up, and they didn't get away with it. And at every level, it was exposed, and there was a huge public outcry as a result of it. You know, the people took to the streets, and there was people power.
Yeah.
The fire brigade blew the windows out of the Parliament building with hoses. The farmers flung manure all over them, and a million people took to the streets and protested. And you know, many people died in the lead up to it. It was honestly the best thing you can really see about how these things are covered up, and the corruptions and the machine that goes on to cover this up. So Dutroux is good. We see huge traits of Dutroux in Sidney Cooke, and the Dirty Dozen.
Yeah, the parallels are there.
Huge traits in that. And again, Fred and Rose West.
Agreed.
And Fred and Rose West takes it to another level, because it's got huge similarities between, like you said, what we saw with the American guy in the island.
Exactly.
Huge similarities. So, you know, these were all pretty much in living memory. A lot of people might not know it, but someone of my era would have definitely known Sidney Cooke. And of course, Fred and Rose West, you know, they remain some of the biggest serial killers in the world. And all to the same effect. This is all about the abduction and mutilation of children and young people. So it's been a very interesting one to research. And Cooke, you can spiral off in many different directions. There's a documentary done by Channel 4 about this guy Brian Fields. He is connected to a member of Cooke's gang. They served a prison sentence together, and were in the same area when certain kids went missing. So it's again, and I actually made an appeal to go and visit Fields, and the prison service warned me that if I contact him one more time, that I'll be done for harassment. You know, I only wrote to him once, and they were straight on me, their intelligence team, that I'm not able to contact him again. So, I mean, we're not just talking
we're talking
one-offs and getting
decades.
caught. Decades of getting away with it. And then when they get caught, just ridiculously inadequate investigations. And it's only really when the media do their job, and there's times when they do a good job, that they really start looking at, and there's a public outrage that we see that they start getting rid of the initial investigation team, and new people get on, and things start moving in the right direction. But we don't really get the results that we should, and this is what we see on both cases.
Agreed.
Shocking. And again, if we look at Detroit, we will see the same over there. And Cooke and his lot, they had connections with Holland, Belgium, and so we see this transference of kids to other countries.
Of course we do.
Yeah, so very interesting. I mean, it's something that I could go on and on and on about. It goes off in so many directions. And the other thing we look at, back in the 80s, you had people like Roger Cooke and dispatches from Channel 4. They were actually doing proper good investigations.
Yeah,
they were really doing
absolutely.
it. We don't see anything like that anymore.
No, we
Nothing.
Don't. You couldn't have that with the way that technology has allowed information to spread. You have a show like that, and you touch on subjects like we're touching on right now, and you start gaining traction on a story like that, and they don't want that at all. Because if you imagine if Jill Dando and Crime Watch were going in the way they are now, if they had a format that they had back then, how quickly things would be resolved, even from a localized, smaller, crime point of view.
The other thing I want to highlight is something that I've, this is the one thing that we've got to push for, and luckily my evidence at the independent inquiry has made it more difficult now for kids' homes, social services, and the missing persons police units to not do their job. So I can pat myself on the back for that one. And hopefully it will go on to, I'd say, save lives. I'm not dramatic in that, because
of course
it might mean kids are murdered or protected from murder. Also, let's look at the after effects of the likes of Cooke and the West. How many suicides have occurred or attempted suicides amongst the survivors of Fred West? There's many. They've lost a couple of their children to suicide, alcoholism. One of the boys went on to become a sex offender. Now, knowing what we know now about the West, that's not surprising, is it? He in himself is a victim. He would have endured years of sadistic, vile abuse and witnessed the most appalling atrocities. And it makes you sometimes now look at offenders and what makes them in a different light, in a more humane light. Because Fred West has created sex offenders who've gone on to abuse.
Of course.
So indirectly, that's Fred West's fault, right? And a suicide, a life lost to trauma, to tragedy, to frustration, to no way out, to hopelessness. That's his fault as well.
Agreed.
And then addiction and alcoholism, mental health, domestic violence. We can attribute this all to these abusers. And not just that, their next generation go on to be dysfunctional as well. So it's 3 generations for this dysfunctionality and pain to eat out. So, these people leave a legacy of pain and destruction behind, and it's outrageous. So, I think the police need to do a better job. And unfortunately, I'm going to leave you with something. And this shows the state of how this is.
Okay.
When I was in the police, they were, to a degree, I've got many criticisms of them, but they had some class act detectives, and they did. They really were old school. They knew, they were tough.
Yeah. Okay.
They were resilient, and they did a job, and they did. You know, they weren't perfect, but as it went, they've retired, or they've left, or they've had enough. They've gone. They've gone. There's nothing left.
Yeah.
And a mate of mine contacted me. He said, "I need to share something with you." He said he knows a guy who trains the new officers joining, and part of their training, they do a little bit in the training centres, the academies, whatever they're called now. I don't know. And then they're released to a division, to a station for a few weeks to go out with real officers and see how it's done. And one guy, he didn't like being called to see you next Tuesday and other abuse that you get the moment you put on a uniform and walk the streets. You just get abused, right? I look back on it.
Right. Okay.
First time I walked out the station with my uniform, I was so proud of myself. Someone drove past in a car and called me a wanker.
You're
officially
indoctrinated.
And it just made me laugh. But back then I thought, how dare he, but you are that thin blue line. You are, you call no one, you are it. Yeah. And if someone decides to pull a knife out, the doorman of a nightclub, he can run. The tough guy, they can run. You can't run. You have to, and it's very daunting. It's a real responsibility that takes a lot of getting used to. So this officer joined. He's frightened of being abused. So they say to him, listen, the best thing to do is to go out on patrol with someone you feel comfortable with. Okay? And he was like, oh, okay. So the day finishes. Anyway, the next day they're to parade at the police station to go on patrol. This idiot turns up with his dad. He brings his dad to work.
No.
Yeah. And this is the caliber. Another guy, get this, he also is frightened, and he's
a police officer was scared of what was going to be the public reaction, and he was told to bring and work with somebody who he felt comfortable with. So he brought his dad to his first day of work.
I mean,
amazing.
What was inferred was work with a guy there that you feel comfortable working with. But he's so thick. He brought his dad into work.
Amazing.
Another guy. He was anxious and I think he had a mental health issue. I mean, there's loads of good, solid individuals that would love to do that job. And they said the same, well, look, come in and he said, can I bring something in? It gives me comfort. And they were like, well, look, yeah, as long as it's legal and, of course you can bring something in. He brings in his pet land snail.
Wait, his pet land snail?
Yeah.
Listen, listen, I can get behind the pet land snail. You can put it in a little thing. Bringing your dad is mad. I'm more.
Yeah, but land snails are massive. They're the size of a mug.
Oh,
a cup.
Of course they are. Yeah, massive, big African land snail. Oh
African
yeah, no, that's too big, man. Nah, that's too big. That's too big.
But look, listen. It doesn't. If you don't, but these are police officers.
Yeah.
I mean, bringing in a land snail and bringing your dad into work is a bridge too far. It's weird. These people aren't balanced. And should they be the thin blue line protecting the public?
Well, I
think they should be sectioned.
If we believe what we've been going on about this evening, it fits perfectly into the sort of police they would want on the streets, John. Do you see what I mean? Like it falls into that criteria. And why else would judges hand out lenient sentences? Why else would police that would bring their dads to work get a job there unless there was some larger issue at play here? I just want to put it to the public who's watching this now. What do you think? If you agree with us and you're watching this live, put a white or one in the side chat. And if you're watching this back, let us know what you think in the comments, because we really want this to be a discussion. And from the next episode, we will be showing comments and questions and things like that. So do get involved, because we want to hear from you. We want to keep this conversation going. And these two cases tonight have been fascinating. We like to paint a broader picture and give you guys a little bit something different to think of when it comes to these cases, because just going over the thesis is all over the internet for half the cases we're talking about. So we want to sort of broaden your minds and your thinking on things, and I think that's what we've done successfully tonight. John, is there anything else you want to say to the wonderful audience on this subject?
Yeah. No, it's a fantastic topic to go into. It goes deep, and it's not. It's just, if you look at it at face value, or you just read the front page of the paper, you think, right, the West have been caught, murders are going to stop. Now that's what they want. They want that public reassurance that we've got the bad guys and it's all finished. You know, there'll be nothing more to look at, and it's just a fob off. It's when you really look behind it and you apply common sense to this as well. And you know, your mind is like a parachute. It only works when it's open. Have an open mind approach to this, and look at all the surrounding evidence as well. And what gets me is how people believe some of the nonsense that's put out in the press, and they put all reasoning and rational thinking to one side. And what I say to you, be that normal detective, you know, that normal judgment that you would have in standard life, apply this to it. So it's one thing I was on about. You know, if a guy comes home from work and he's late, and he's never late, and he's had a drink, and his wife's like, okay, where you been? Oh, I've been out with my mate. Okay, get away with that one. He comes back next week, and at the same time, he's late, but he smells a perfume. Or he might have a love bite. Oh, the lads did that, and they did this. You know, they're mucking around. And she's starting to get suspicious, and rightly so, because things aren't right. But then you combine it with the fact that he's paying her no interest, they're not really intimate together and things like that. All of a sudden, you're getting the answer. And if it happens one more time, that's it. He's definitely at it. And that is normal reasoning and constructive thinking, and with a modicum of intelligence put into it. You know, and it's independent. And, you know, we make these decisions and these judgments every single day of our life. So when people go, it's wrong to judge, no, you're an idiot if you don't judge. You will die if you don't judge. You
Question
every time
everything,
you
John.
buy something, you judge. You weigh it up. You know, you look at an item. Well, this one's cheaper and this one's got better reviews. You're judging. You put in reason and rationale with everything you do. What I'm saying to people is apply that to this.
Correct.
And look at the screw ups that occur around these people. Constant. And you see this pattern no matter what, you see it, and just look at the bigger picture and look at it, and you know, you should come to the right conclusion.
Agreed.
And but they're brilliant cases, and the parallels are amazing. And I would say, you know, do your own research. You can look these people up. There's some cracking documentaries. Channel 4, back in the 80s and the 90s, were on the ball. I think they're not fit for purpose now, but back then they were on the ball. And look at the Mark Dutroux case as well for a gauge of you know, of how far it goes.
I would just like to conclude with this, John. When we look at the similarities in these cases and how the cases concluded, and then we look at the recent case of the man on the island and how similar tactics were used. This is the most recent case where we've seen evidence of handlers, etc. But it's the only case where we've seen the information spread and detectives pop up on the internet, piece things together, and I think that rattled some cages, because nobody, I don't think, expected the outcome to be so driven by the internet and those who were witnessing it unfolding. And I think for the first time they realized the sheer magnitude of what the modern world can do on this subject when they unite.
And the other thing, what we got to look at is, you know, the member of the monarchy that decided to put his version of events out, and the contempt he shows to anyone with any intelligence. It was
unreal.
And this is how these people think. They think that we're thick, and unfortunately, when you don't do any constructive criticism, you don't look into them. Well, you might as well accept what they're doing and give up your own thinking.
John, it's the psychology of the public. If you, the member of the monarchy, for example, when he went and he gave that ridiculous interview, it's captivating the audience. And what is happening there is you're throwing out a net And what's coming back in the net is changed opinions, because some people are fickle and just want reassured, and that's enough for them.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
the reason that these public statements are made, is to create this illusion of reassurance. And it's, again, a mad topic. It's one of these wide open theories on this global club. It's something I'm very passionate and believe in, and I know you do too, John. So let us know what you guys think. Leave your comments below this video when we're live, and you leave your comments at the side. They might get lost, so leave them in the comments below. Make sure you like and share. Make sure you follow my channel, which is linked below, and all of John's socials. And thank you very much for viewing us. And John will be back again next week. And I just can't thank you enough for being here.
And we've got a treat for next week. There is something special for next week.
Wow.
It's a very fascinating topic indeed.
Well, I look forward to it, and I'm sure everybody else will too. So thank you for watching, and from me, Ron Swanson, as always, be safe out there, guys.